This is Genuine Connections, featuring collaborative conversations about community, content, creativity, commerce, and the convergence of media and marketing.
Hi, I'm Matt Wurst, the CMO at Genuine, and welcome to Genuine Connections. And on this episode, we're going to talk with the CEO of a brand, a production studio, as well as a creator economy icon. His name is Sean Atkins, and he spent 20 plus years at the intersection of consumer and media and tech. And he reversed 5 years of audience decline as president of MTV. He helped build Discovery Plus. He ran Jelly Smack and scaled it to 100 million in revenue. And he launched one of the earliest SaaS ad tech platforms and a TV startup that exited for 9 figures. This guy's done it all. Now today, he serves as CEO of Dhar Mann Studios. Now Dhar Mann, it's a name that sounds familiar. You know who Dhar Mann is. It's the largest scripted digital creator operation in the world, reaching over 170 million followers globally and generating 300 million views every single week. Their studio produces 5 25-minute scripted episodes per week out of a 125,000 square foot facility in Burbank. And they have over 200 people working with approximately 2,000 actors annually. And just earlier this year, Dhar was named NFL's first ever Chief Kindness Officer, leading into Super Bowl 60, including a Be Kind to Your Rival campaign tied to a $100,000 St. Jude charitable activation. This studio has also announced partnerships with Fox Entertainment and Samsung to create vertical video content. Sean is leading the way with Dhar to build something truly remarkable, not just on social, but thinking even bigger. Sean, welcome to our Genuine Connections podcast. It's really great to have you. Thanks so much for making some time for us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So you have a really incredible, just professional biography, but you're doing some even more interesting things, I think, which shows the trajectory of your professional career, but also the skills that you continue to build. And I'm excited to jump in. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Right. Great. Okay. So video is something we know well. You've run MTV, Discovery, Jelly Smack. You helped build HBO Go. These are, as big as it gets when it comes to video. Most people pick one thing. They pick a lane. You've been across a few. And I get the sense that that's probably on purpose.
Yeah.
Has there been, I guess, tell me, what's the through line that you'd connect across all of it?
I've always been the kind of person that gravitated towards where changes in consumer behavior and technology intersected to create new opportunities. I just happen to be blessed that I was born in an era where that happens like every 5 to 7 years, right? So, I started my career in film school. I went to USC Film School, by far the least talented person who was at USC Film School. And so when I got out, I was like trying to find a job like anybody else was. And I found this thing called cable that like nobody really had, and sort of found my way in. And that was the beginning of sort of going to the places where media was going, right? So I was in the early days of cable. And then I one day discovered this thing called the internet in like the mid 90s. And everyone's like, that's not going to be anything. And so I did that for a while. And then I saw the trend for e-commerce and sort of follow those trends every time. And the thing that's consistent is if you see where audience behavior or consumer behavior is shifting, is generally what starts to get my attention, where I generally move to.
Was there a moment when maybe you realized that traditional media, and I'm making air quotes for the listener, that it may not be as much of the future or maybe your future, and that the gravity shifts a little bit towards more of a balance between those who consume and those who create content?
Yeah, I think that I was aware pretty early of sort of a shift in sort of this notion that creative as gatekeeper or sort of someone on pedestal was changing. I don't know if I had the language when I first started realizing it to know that, right? But, again, I grew up as a young boy. My mom was a software coder, right? That was not that uncommon back then, less common now. And so, I just didn't know that you couldn't want to be an actor and write software. You couldn't want to be, to want to be in a band or a musician and think it was cool to make a video game. So I just sort of grew up as an environment where sort of those were things. And so because I always was in an environment where my exposure to kind of media in the traditional sense usually involved me doing something with it more kind of hands-on, I never really grew up with this expectation that it was something other people did or was inaccessible. And because of that, I think it just gave me an openness to when these things like the internet started coming around, when streaming started coming around, to playing in the experiments that allowed sort of that stuff to happen. And it just started becoming more and more clear. I would say the beginning of it was clear in the early days of the, internet, when like blogging started to take off, and then you saw social platforms, my early MySpace, where the sort of notion of the audience could create things and become the creative themselves was pretty clear. And then my career just sort of started to follow that pattern from there.
Well, now here you are, you're CEO at Dhar Mann Studios, and it's interesting because my kids who are teenagers now, there's less that we have in common than I would have thought when they were first born, right? They're going to grow up and love everything I love. But one of the few things that we have in common is this really affinity for and passion for those who create with real intent behind it and connection, right? And from the outside, some people may think or look at a creator-built studio and think, it's a lovable YouTube channel. But I'm curious what you saw when you walked in the door. Is there something that may have surprised you about just
It's great question. So there's a few things. I would say, first of all, I was aware of Dhar and his success because I was in the creator ecosystem.
Yeah.
But I didn't meet him till he was pretty far along in his success journey. When I met him the first time in person, part of why I wanted to meet with him was, his story I find personally resonant in that, when you really follow his story, this is a man who, immigrant, person of color. And as he tells his story, like everything you can do in your life to either have happen to you to make life difficult, or you do to yourself to screw your life up, he had happened to him, like from, being bullied to religiously persecuted to running with the wrong crowds to getting in trouble with the law to getting out of trouble with the law to being in bad relationships to falling victim to bad financial business. There's all those sort of things. And yet, despite all that, which any one of them alone would sort of destroy a person, he obviously, you would expect, was in a pretty low place. He rebuilt his life. And with this belief that you could have difficulties and challenges in life and you can put positivity back in it. So I just sort of wanted to meet the person who sort of created that brand. And the second you meet him, you realize how authentic it is. It's just inspiring to be sort of around someone whose story has so much like weight and growth in it. The second thing was on the business side, it's very rare to see a creator who's kind of solved the talent dependency problem, right? So most of them, they are the on-camera. And Dhar did start out that way, but he now has this huge scripted business. So he's basically, his company has created a genre that most people replicate. He's the number one scripted creator on all these platforms on a global basis. He has this infrastructure that's very efficient, very audience minded. Like everything's like, what does the audience want? How do we do it more efficiently? And sort of like always does it a different way. And part of that power is that because he didn't come from traditional media, he sort of didn't know the rules, right? So it's like, he didn't know that you supposed to have 200 people to make a TV show. He's like, we do it with 3. He didn't know that one human being wasn't supposed to write 2,000 scripts. So he did, right? And that begets sort of a very interesting culture that, a lot of, even when I was a CEO, you try and instill in these traditional channels, like, how do I instill this sort of like entrepreneurial energy into an entity that's been around for a long time? And it's interesting. He's got one of those rare companies that's sort of this notion of like creative and efficiency has always been there from day one.
Well,
it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. It's like there's Dhar, the individual. There's Dhar Mann Studios, the production company. There's Dhar Mann, the brand, which are really 3 different things as I hear you talk about them.
That's correct.
I can imagine that there are challenges that come with managing all 3 without letting one like collapse into the other. But how much, I mean, was that the point? Like how much of Dhar's day-to-day has shifted since your arrival just to kind of maintain that?
Yeah, look, he's always been sort of the soul and always will be, right? Like I tell people, it's like I'm very lucky in that I run like a family brand, right? Multi-generational, multicultural family brand where my Walt Disney is still alive, right? So like, for those of us my age, right? Like I loved Magical World of Disney when Walt would do an open, although he didn't do everyone. I didn't expect to see Walt in the content, but I appreciate it when it was. And we sort of have that right now. We're like, the fans love him in person, but they also just like to see the show. And so for us, it's really a question, and you sort of talked about it on that Venn diagram of like, what is Dhar Mann the brand as person versus Dhar Mann the brand as now. The good news for us is like we're talking about a very tight Venn diagram. It's not like it's widely disparate, right? So the overlap is like 95%, but there are things that Dhar the person can do in the brand that like the brand can't do. Like I'm making a sort of extreme example. Like could Dhar do a personal integration around like Mercedes? Use that example. Mm-hmm. Sure, he could. But our brand is more Ford, right? So it wouldn't like violate the brand if one of our fans like, oh, so Dhar was like, I saw Dhar in a Mercedes commercial. Like, oh, okay, he's a person who is success, so I get that. But our audience, right, is like I always tell people, like we are Walmart, Ford, McDonald's. We are in every part of the world. We are the middle, and I mean in a positive, non-political way. And we're heartland. We are families. We are putting good into the world. And so, I do joke with him sometimes, although it does put a lot of pressure that you have to be perfect, which is impossible for any human being.
Well, and I think maybe that's another part of a job description that, differentiates a creator from a CEO. Like I would have asked maybe 5 years ago, certainly before that, whether a creator needs a CEO. Like it's a knock on the creator. Mm-hmm. But you've seen this at Jelly Smack, right? At Discovery's creator investments. So I'm curious what's the real answer behind the scenes? Like what can't a founder creator do alone once the audience hits a certain size? He can't keep writing thousands of scripts, or maybe he can.
Correct.
I don't know.
Correct. So, so I coach a lot of creators and a lot of CEOs into this journey. The answer is this is not a one size fits all answer, right? Because usually what happens is one of two moments mostly happen. The creator / entrepreneur, because I don't think this is that different than any entrepreneur's journey, right? Gets to a point they're like, I think that the scale of the company has gotten beyond sort of what my superpowers are. And they're like, and it's always an and I don't really want those new things to be my superpower, right? Because you have to shift in role. The second piece of it is can be just like, hey, I've gotten to a certain level of scale, and what I've realized in this journey as a founder is that the thing I love the most is this thing over here, and I want to spend all my time. But we're at so much scale right now, I have to do 27 things, and I want to really focus on this. And so it's usually one or some on a continuum of those two things. Like, oh, this is way beyond my capabilities and I don't want to go learn it. Not in a negative way, but like, that's not my kind of call.
No, that is the entrepreneur. That is the classic.
And this, I just tell you, like, this is no different than any entrepreneur I've ever met.
There you go.
Right. Because, I always say to the entrepreneurs I work with, and having been an entrepreneur multiple times, I'm like, look, typically the biggest constraint is you. And I'll even stipulate that the best person in the building at everything is you. Because you bleed, you'll die for it, right? That being said, it also means you're the constraint. And so, there's a great book called The E-Myth around this. And it's like ultimately for any company to scale, founders, the kind of founding team, whatever you want to call it, they all have to sort of let go of certain pieces. And it's a painful birthing journey. I've been through it several times. It's not easier each time. You just sort of have the maturity of understanding it. And so I think for what happened in the industry, why you're starting to see CEOs and COOs and, a lot of senior leadership companies, creators, is twofold. One, they've gotten to scale where like they're like, oh my God, I need bodies, right? I need to sort of start to solve this problem. I think the second thing is the industry itself has gotten to enough scale where like those opportunities are interesting enough to entrepreneurial like CEO types, right? Because you're certainly not doing this because you're like, I'm going to go get compensated at like, Fortune 100. You're doing it because you're like, you can see the path and you like the entrepreneurial thing and you believe in the vision of the person you're partnering with. But there's a window in every industry where that sort of starts to get to the point where sort of like traditional people in that area are willing to kind of go to the more entrepreneurial side because it's enough economics that they can take the risk.
Well, those economics are something that I'm curious about as we build out this industry collectively and together, right? Like you kind of go macro for a second, and that's the creator economy is supposedly worth, I think, just $250 billion or some absurd number. But it, like any economy, there is a lot concentrated at the top, and there is dispersion in the middle and bottom. So what does that number actually mean for the individual creator trying to make a living at this, right? Like how many people can realistically build sustainable businesses? I want the number to grow. You've done an incredible job creating those opportunities, right? There have been development programs and skill buildings, which is amazing. But is there something that also, and this may be a two-part question, but what separates the ones that can do it and sustain it from the ones who maybe shouldn't or can't?
So there's a lot of nuance and detail in this. It's a great question. So my first thing I will say here is that sort of one of my pet peeves around this question, at least is the way people talk about it, is that they have a tendency to think about it in the creative class. Like I'm thinking about creators versus writers, or, creators versus a newscaster, right? Which is just one segment of creator, right? And I always tell people, it's like, you got to understand creator is infiltrating every industry, right? Like there's no industry anyone has ever been able to pitch me that I'm like, you're going to be competing against at least two challenger brands driven by a creator in everything. Like, I'm like, you can say to me like, oh no, but I participate in cement. I'm like, gonna happen to you, right? Because there's not a business that doesn't have marketing channels, right? Like there just isn't one. And so at the end of the day, there will be somebody who will use that marketing channel, become a creator, and then they'll use that leverage to sort of be competing against you. So first thing I tell people is like, I would encourage you to think about creator in a very broad sense, right? And, and so if you think about it that way, you're like, well, what's the upward bounds for entrepreneurs? Kind of zero. I mean, there's no, not zero. It's kind of infinite. There is no upward bound. Is the fail rate high? Yes. Because if you and I talked about, they talk about like 90% of small business fails. Like, I don't think those numbers generally change industry to industry when you're talking about scale. The second thing I think that makes this a bit of a confusing conversation is because they might not consider I am a lawyer who does Instagram posts as marketing as a creator, or they might, like, it's right. They're not kind of thinking about that person. The other thing that I think is confusing is they have a tendency, because the margin to enter as a creator is zero. Like you can set up an Instagram or a TikTok or a Snapchat thing in 5 seconds. And so sometimes when I think they're sizing the market, they're like anybody who says they're a creator. And that's a little bit like trying to size the restaurant business by saying anyone who cooks at home.
Right. And that's a great analogy. Yeah. I mean,
I was like, well, you should not be counting me. I love to bake. I love to barbecue. I'm not going to be competing against McDonald's tomorrow. It's just not happening. And so I think I've always said to people, I'd really love to see a study that solves both those problems. Again, I don't think you're going to see, like as in any entrepreneurial thing, like, oh, it turns out like you have a 50% chance of succeeding as a creator. You're not going to see that, because any entrepreneurial venture has a higher percentage of failure than success. The second thing I would say is the third thing I will say on this, particularly if you're talking the creative side, I actually think, and I don't have the data for this, this is pure intuitive. I actually think it's better. And what I mean by that is, when you go to a film school, they don't even hide it from you. Like 95% of your classmates will not be in the film industry within 5 years. Like, it's like I always tell people, it's like dad got the dumbest degree possible, right? It's like, who goes to spend like, $300,000 for something that's 95% chance it's not going to work? And so it already is terrible odds that you're going to be in the thing, let alone be in the success rate. So like, it's sort of like, being in the entertainment industry and being one of the people who kind of makes it in the kind of extreme sense is basically like saying my plan is to be a professional baseball player with a 20-year career. Like, okay, you've got like a 1 in a million shot. So I also think you have to compare it to the reality of the sort of not creator version to make sure you're having the right comparison. So if I was tomorrow a writer and I want to write comedy, I'd be writing comedy skits on YouTube and TikTok and all this stuff like that. My chance of being successful on TikTok and YouTube is probably the same as my chance of success in traditional, which is pretty remote. That being said, if the moment happens, if the 1 in a million chance happens, in the creator version of it, I own the IP and the audience and the community. Or if it happens in the traditional thing, I do not.
I think I 98% agree with that. I think the only difference is if I am naturally talented to the point of being at that upper class level of basketball or baseball player, there isn't a platform algorithm that could hold me back. And that's the only difference that I think. I'm curious where and how
I would actually, I could, again, we're talking edge cases, right?
Yeah.
Again, all analogies are deeply flawed, so I will own that, right? Is that there is, I always tell you, like, there's an algorithm in everything, right? There is an algorithm in the way you get into sports, right? Are you naturally talented? Did your parents have the resources? Were they willing to put you in a club teams? Were they willing to back you? Did you then go to the right development league? Did you get recruited to the right high school? Did you then get recruited to the right college? Did those teams have winning things? So like, that's why I always tell people, and I actually don't joke, and I said, I'm the least talented person who is in my cohort in my film school. And I actually, doesn't bother my ego. It's true. And I said, but if you're measuring it on length of career, there's like 2 of us. So does that mean I was more talented than them? No. It doesn't mean I was more talented. I think we all worked equally, but as in terms of like using that sports algorithm, more things broke my way than broke their way, right? So like in this, to use an analogy, I ended up on a championship high school team, which meant I saw more people who recruited me. So I got a general chance to go to Division I baseball team. Oh, it turns out one made it to the World Series of playoffs, which got me more, right? Because like I have dear friends who are were recruited into like Division I, a team then immediately drafted into like the Dodgers highest level.
Yeah.
And they never made it. And those people threw 100-mile-an-hour fastballs. But it just turns out, the one I talk about all the time is it turns out when his window was, the league that brought them in had a surplus of that superpower at the time. So the distribution just happened to be when he was in
factors outside your control.
The 100-mile-an-hour baseball players, there was a lot of them. So it turned out it wasn't that special for that 7-year window, which was his peak window. So there's a gatekeeper problem in everything, to be clear.
Yeah. So I want to ask about a word that is used a lot in our industry, which is authenticity. It may be the most used or overused word in creator marketing, and maybe even the most abused at this point. I mean, does the concept behind it still drive so much of what you're doing, or have we moved past authenticity as a meaningful differentiator into something else? Is it trust or something more specific?
I think it's used. So I agree it's overused, but I think it's used in different ways to have different meanings, right? So if you're on the brand or agency side, when they're talking authenticity, right, they're talking about sort of the match between the brand and the creator, right? I would believe, right, for example, having me do with my receding hairline and gray hair being the spokesperson for a luxury shampoo, I'm not gonna feel too authentic, right? It's gotta my wavy locks are not right, correct, right. It's they're not bringing you and I in to be you guys should be the face of this premium luscious curls. I'm
I wouldn't turn it down, but it may not actually.
I'll take the money,
career.
Right? And so there's that way it's used. For the creator, it's sort of the similar, but they're talking about I don't want to do anything that isn't going to work in my community that will cause damage to the respect and trust that I have to them, because they are here for that. Now, you can make the argument that that version of them they're sharing with the community is an archetype. That's fine. That's fine. People live their lives and be whoever they are. No one has a right to own who you are. And so where the conflict generally happens is in the meeting of those two. Like, who has the better right to claim the authenticity? Is it the brand declaring what the authentic expression is from a traditional top-down brand management perspective? Or is the creator who has to deliver that message into a community? Who owns the authenticity? And so that's where the tension is, because a brand, and I was trained in this, well, a traditional brand is like, I know the audience, I'm doing the research, and this is how it has to be expressed and what you have to do. Whereas the creator's like, yeah, no, I live in the place you have to deliver the message, and it has to work on a platform, and it has to. And so you get into the conflict over authenticity usually has the challenge there. And so where it'll fall into a challenge is where then, if the brand misjudges where their line is, it'll fail.
Yeah.
Right. And if a creator misjudges or doesn't deliver what feels like a trustworthy thing, it'll also fail. And so like, it's that gap in there is where the game is played. And so there's where you get into tensions where like a brand will say, hey, I want you to deliver X metrics because I like your community. The creator will go, okay, and they'll do what they do. And then the brand will be like, ooh, that makes me nervous. I need you to do this and this and this and this and this. And then all of a sudden, and it's not, by the way, I never take this like it's coming from a bad place from the brand, but then all of a sudden you get into conflict. The conflict is like, because the creator wants it to work. Like a creator's not like, they just want it to work.
Of course.
You're telling the thing you bought, like, I'm overruling all of your creative instincts because of these other rules. And then they're telling you like, but you're holding me to an ideal that I'm telling you is not going to work. And then you're not going to work with me again because I did it your way.
Well, and that's where I think that, I think I threw the word trust in at the end of my question. And I think that may be more of the essence of what you're getting at when we talk about why brands choose a creator, and they have to give up some of that control and put some trust in the creator, and vice versa. There has to be some mutual trust. And like in the time that you've been in this role and continuing to scale and build what on top of what Dhar was doing beforehand, brand partnerships are a big part of it. From the NFL partnership, which I loved at the Super Bowl, to Samsung and Fox, and those are different types of deals, right? There's original content and distribution. NFL had a charitable component to it, which I thought was great. From your seat, and we both come from experience working with and directly for brands. Why do brands need creators now? Not in like a buzzwordy way, but like structurally. What shifted in how audiences consume content?
Well, the first is that the attention has completely fragmented, right? Like you just can't do, it's not like there are 3 broadcast networks and 12 magazines. Like it's just, those days are so long gone. And so in a world where you have to try and deliver your brand message in a completely fragmented environment, the next best thing you can sort of do is like, okay, well, how do I get closer to the customer and the community? And that's hard to do in kind of traditional channels because there isn't really a customer and community sitting around CSI, right? I mean, there's a sort of a reach play, but there isn't like, no one running around. And so, so if you want to get to those people on a mass scale now, you're talking about creators because they basically grew up on the platforms where everyone is migrated over to. And so that's sort of from just a pure logistic. If you want to get to the audiences you're trying to get to, you have to get to them on the platforms. Those platforms are not controlled; they're controlled by the platforms, but they're controlled in terms of audience and community by creators. The second reason I tell people you need to be there is because, just as a classic marketer, right? You always have to be in every channel at a minimum, so you understand its efficacy or not. Right. The interesting thing about creators is they're kind of every channel. like particularly you get to a scale creator, right? Like if you're talking to Dhar, you're talking about someone who does short form, long form, in person, not in person, sponsorship, not sponsorship, commercial, like production, not product. Like you sort of do everything. So the other reason to sort of do it is in an interesting way. Creators are actually the embodiment of CMOs always say they've always wanted. I want a partner that I can have a lot of creative freedom with, and I can test a lot of stuff that has a lot of reach, and I can do a lot of different things. We can learn together. Well, the only part of media that's actually feasible with is actually a creator, right? Whereas if I said the same thing and I was like Coca-Cola and I'm looking at traditional channels, I'm like, okay, well, I can't do that with a TV partner because they're only just TV. I can't do that with a promotions partner because they're just promotions. I can't do that with like a digital banner thing because they're just banner. Whereas a creator, you're like, I can do all, like our Adobe thing is like, it was all the things. It was like literally all the things. It's just not doable in a consolidated manner in almost any other channel.
I think even as, and look, I was early days social, as were you. I think as the competition for attention becomes more challenging, one thing I certainly have gravitated towards and think there's an opportunity around creator expansion and opportunity, whether it's with existing content or repurposing content or even original content, is more of like what Walmart is doing with its creator program, right? Putting more of that content on its site. Probably 100 million people are on Walmart's app or website. So that's an opportunity, I think, but there's so much that a creator can grow into in terms of both skill and production quality and corporate efficiency and understanding data. Where do you think, as far as a maturity curve, if there's such a thing, are we in early innings, middle game when it comes to what?
Oh, I still think we're like, I don't even think we've got an inning one.
Okay. So where do we grow next from here?
I think because, there's a few reasons for that, right? Is that, in some of the places, obviously, in the last year, the sort of like, oh my God, creators are real, like happened to like 75% of the industry like last year. Now, for those of us like you and I, Matt, who've been around for a long time, we're like, wait, what? Like, wait, what? But, and I always tell people, it's like having gone through a bunch of changes in the space, I said, the consumer behavior, bringing it back, the consumer behavior changes usually a decade in advance. And the advertiser and brand behavior is like a decade after that, right? It's like I remind people, it's like, people talk about the monopoly that is sort of Google's like display business, right? And they think about it like this, like it basically happened in by 2018. Think about that, right? We think about it like this long lasting thing, but like their monopoly control over, like it was relatively recent in the grand scheme of things. And so, or you think about like the implosion of cable. People forget that 8 years ago was the peak of cable, the peak.
The rate of change is certainly accelerating. I mean, that is undeniable.
But the brand infrastructure to translate into that rate of change is literally at least a decade behind, right? Because think of it, a great example I give people. Dhar went and spoke to a very huge Fortune 100, brought in to speak to them. It was like the whole C-suite of the company, corporate, all of their brands. And you've met Dhar. He's an unbelievably engaging person. It was supposed to be like a 15-minute conversation. It was like 2 hours. And I was like, as a CEO, I was like, well, I just made a lot of business, right? And everyone's like, oh my God, we have to be in business with this guy. But what happens inside the organization is something like this happens. CEO says to CMO, dude, I really like this person is like totally nails. We gotta be in business. They're like, yeah, I absolutely agree. So the CMO calls the divisional CMOs like, hey, we've got this talent. You got to get with them. One of those divisional CMOs goes, okay. And then they pass it down to, by the time it gets back to me and Dhar, it's like the West Coast manager of social buying. And it's not from any malicious intent, and that person's unbelievably intelligent, but the little physical architecture of the marketing inside the value chain is completely broken. It's like there is a TV buyer, a digital video buyer, a display buyer, a social earned media person, a PR person, a social person. Then each one of those people have an agency of record. That agency of record has like 6 other brands. They're optimizing the market. So by the time CMO's vision is like, I want to do this multimodal program with this huge creator that represents who we are. And by the time it gets through their system, it translates to like, hey, Dhar or Matt or Sean, will you hold this keychain for 30 seconds for $20,000? So it's, I don't blame anyone. It's like the value chain is literally set up to not do it.
Well, I've seen clips, I've heard you talk about, and I can't believe we've made it 30 plus minutes now and not used the magic 2 letters of AI. Yes, there is so much emphasis on what it can help in the creative process, but is this also an area where on maybe behind the scenes or from a efficiency or communication or work stream perspective, an orchestrated perspective, this is a way to improve the creative process and even the output, because we're ensuring that communication lines are more stringently adhered to or consistently maintained? I don't know.
I don't know because like most people, I'm an optimist. I think AI is going to do some things. I think there's some real things from a societal level we have to work through, but generally I think technology has a tendency to create economic opportunity. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's an AI solvable problem because from my exposure to it, it's an incentive and culture problem more than it is a tech and kind of hard infrastructure problem, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, the chances that I'm trying to sell a multi-million-dollar deal when it gets to that level, the person sitting across from me probably looks like me, right? It's probably some late mid-career person who doesn't watch YouTube, who finds out like what's cool by asking their kid. And that's sort of a difficult process because, media is so bifurcated. It's sort of like trying to figure out what book to read. It's like the only way you know a book's good is someone tells you to read it. But like there's a million unbelievably spectacular books out there. But the chance that I tell you, give me a book to read, that me and your best friend give you the same book is almost zero. And so that'd be like trying to determine like, what the New York Times bestseller was by randomly asking people. It's just not going to work. And so I don't think you can solve sort of that like culture gap. I sat at a meeting about a year ago. I was invited by a couple brands to kind of like their version of an upfront. Dhar came and I came and I sat for 3.5 hours with their agency. And these companies are probably spending several $100 million on media, several $100 million quarterly, not even annually, quarterly. And Dhar was like, how's that? I was like, it was great. These people were fascinating. I said, what was interesting? I said, Dhar, for 3.5 hours, not a single person mentioned a creator, asked me about a creator or anything. They did talk a lot about a lot of shows on CBS, though.
What I think you've done that I admire and respect is to help maybe accelerate or facilitate this change in perception or even awareness is launching an agency inside DMS, right? Helping other creators monetize their IP on YouTube and maybe elsewhere. It's a move to me as I think about that says we're not just a studio, we're becoming infrastructure for the creator landscape. How far can that go?
I don't think there's a limit because again, in entrepreneurial environments that have a high kind of entrepreneurial class at entry, there's usually a ton of infrastructure players, right? So let's take it out of the media business. Let's think about restaurants, right? Restaurants range from like a cart sitting on a corner in New York City to McDonald's with 50,000 locations around the world, right? So, obviously a McDonald's or a Starbucks or, those are the monolithic monsters. There's not a lot of them, but they're monolithic. And then there's all sorts of permutation in between. But the majority of activity in the restaurant business is a mom and pop restaurant somewhere in like Topeka that's probably selling delicious falafels to a community, and they've been doing it for 20 years and they make a nice living and everyone thinks it's great. It's a hole in the wall. And like, if you found out about it, you're like, this is the greatest food I ever had. Right. And their personal goal isn't like, I don't want to be the McDonald's at falafels. And that's totally fine. But that's the majority of the business. But even in that restaurant business, right, there's a bunch of POS providers. There's a bunch of, linen providers. There's people who do time card management. There's people who do loans, that menu design. Like there's all this infrastructure. So if you and I decided today, Matt, that we are actually going to go to Topeka and start a falafel restaurant, the amount of infrastructure work that you and I have to do is pretty minimal, right? Because there's like service providers. And those things take time as the industry grows and matures, those sort of infrastructure. So like that's sort of where the creator business is. Like it's going through a few cycles. So like the kind of manager infrastructure class is in for a while. Now it's starting to consolidate because it's getting mature. There's been a bunch of tools that have come in and out. Like, a lot of what we just did at Adobe is like their tools are this sort of prosumer version of consumer is really starting to take off and really start to provide an infrastructure on the tooling side. And so like things that we might do in terms of providing editing services or, graphic services kind of thing sort of exist. It's just a question of whether the economics align to where the industry is on its cycle. Like some of these stuff that exists today as infrastructure and the creators couldn't have existed 3 years ago. Couldn't have existed 5 years ago. Like you couldn't have done what fifth quarter does today, just literally wouldn't have been possible like 5 years ago. And so there's some version of fifth quarter 5 years from now it's going to be doing a bunch of stuff that now the economics support that it's more viable from an outsource perspective than it is to an in-source. And that's usually where the inflection points are.
You've built businesses from scratch. You've turned around legacy media companies, and now you're scaling a creator studio into what you're calling a global storytelling brand. What's the thing you know now that you wish you'd known at the beginning of all this?
That it's okay to have a nonlinear career. The pressure we put on people to sort of do one thing and only one thing, I don't think it's healthy. I think, I like what I always call like T-shaped leaders, people who have a deep expertise that I don't have, which isn't that hard because I'm not that smart. But the ability to sort of understand lots of the business so they can flex. And I think that, part of the challenge that gives me a lot of empathy for my friends in the media business is it's so lane driven that when there's a change in the industry, it's tough to change lanes because sort of it's just not been acceptable, right? So for most of my career, like I always tell people, it's funny, retroactively people look at my career like, what an amazing way you designed yourself to all these things. But like the amount of times I just wouldn't get a phone call or wasn't considered for a role because most of the people I was competing against did one thing. Like, hey, Sean, do you want to talk about this position, running a cable network, right? I'm sure everyone else they were interviewing had only run a cable network. That was their whole career. And so, we could debate whether Doug Herzog made the right call or not. But, that's what I think, you're looking at. And so I don't think I appreciated the fact that my curiosity and willingness to take risks at switching would pay off. I spent most of my time sort of worrying about it when I should have just been like, you know what, that's what the audience is doing. You're curious about it. You're interested in it. That usually takes care of most things. That's the advice I'd probably go give myself. I give people this advice a lot. I said, which is simple to say, but like if you really go through the intellectual exercise, I said, go back and think about your career. From like when you started, like 22, you're out of college, you started your career. By the time you were probably 30, you had gotten some level of success, pretty decent success, or I probably wasn't having a conversation with you, right? Right? And so you think about that, it's like 8 years. So if you take the economic, I'm not saying it's not real, but you take the economic, I got to pay for my family concern off the table for a second, and just think about it from an ego perspective, right? Because a lot of, besides job loss or job switch, is besides the economics is the ego of identity loss. But I used to be this, can I be that, right? Totally. Okay. And by the way, I've been through it. It's hard. I get it. I said, but if you take just for a second, I said, go through the intellectual exercise and say, now, do you think you're smarter than you were at 22? And everyone's like, yeah. I said, but like, do you think a factor of 1 time smarter, 2 times? Like, oh, significantly. I said, and by the way, you think you have a lot of wisdom? Yeah. I said, okay. If I transplanted you today into 22-year-old there, how successful? They're like, oh, I would have killed it because all the fears were gone. Like, that's okay. Mm-hmm. So now imagine I take you, 44-year-old, 52-year-old you, and I literally turn you into choose anything. Like, I'm going to make you start as an assistant in cement. I don't know why I'm picking on cement today. In cement,
It's a hard business to crack.
Right, but chances that like 5-6 years into your career, you're not on a pretty great success track record, pretty low.
Yeah,
pretty low. And I said, again, I'm not being Pollyanna, but if you just sort of take take a look at time, and I go, so, as scary as it can be, like, and I pointed out, I was like, I have a friend who's literally done this like 4 times, and he's like so inspiring me because none of his career shifts have anything in common with one another. But he's just sort of realized he's like, I'm better each time because yes, the industry is scary, but like, I know what the fear looks like. I know what it's like to network. I know that I have to do this hard work. I have to work hard with everyone. So that gives me, when I'm trying to give people hope, I'm like, I think you have far more skills and talent really than you think. I said, I'm not disputing the economic concern, which drives all of us. I said, but this isn't a talent problem.
Well, I appreciate the thoughts, the sentiment, and the guidance, because this is really where, as we strive to make genuine connections everywhere, that authentic, trusted, and experienced wisdom is really powerful. So, Sean, thank you so much again for joining us, for being with us, and look forward to seeing what you and Dhar and your entire growing and incredible team continue to do.